We're back with another exciting episode. We hope you're loving our content, and there's plenty more to come. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay notified about new episodes. Now let's dive into the podcast. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take a whole stack of information and really distill it down to the key nuggets for you. Today, we're diving into the pretty complex legal story surrounding Andrew Tate in Romania.
Exactly. Our mission today is really to unpack the main takeaways from this specific source. We'll be looking at themes like, resilience when things get tough, the details of legal strategy, and also the big impact experiences like this can have on someone's personal philosophy. We are focusing just on the perspective in this material, trying to give you a clear picture of what the source claims happened and what lessons it says were learned.
Yeah, this isn't really about just the headlines. It's about understanding the narrative as it's presented in Chapter 9 and pulling out insights into how legal battles can shape, a public figure's life, their business, their whole worldview. So let's just jump right in. Where does the source actually begin this story?
Okay, so the document kicks off with Andrew Tate's arrest in Romania, December 2022. Pretty dramatic start. And it immediately frames it with this quote, "They always come for you when you're at your peak." That's quite the opening line.
It definitely sets a confrontational tone right away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And what's really striking is how the source just instantly labels the charges serious ones, like human trafficking, rape, running an organized crime group, calls them lies, a setup. A setup to quiet down a voice that was getting too loud. It says they were a mix of old allegations and new fabrications. And the media's role, according to this source, it says they loved it, of course, painting him as the villain, the misogynist, the kingpin. But then the document pushes back, saying he's always been about empowerment. It reframes what they saw as trafficking is actually mentorship, guiding women to use their talents.
Yeah.
He then ends up under house arrest, which the source just describes as moving, from one legal restriction to another.
Right. And this framing, it highlights a key lesson the source seems to want to get across. It suggests that legal troubles can basically find you no matter how you act, especially if you challenge the status quo or if you just get, too influential. The document pretty much implies they'll look for any excuse to take you down. It definitely makes you think, well, how would someone navigate a system if they felt they could be used against them like that?
Okay, so after the arrest, the source really goes into his time in detention. And this is where it gets very vivid and honestly quite brutal in its description. It compares it to being thrown into a dungeon, the cell, more suited for cockroaches. Describes no light, bedbugs lice.
That's a stark picture.
It really is. And this part of the document heavily focuses on his resilience through that. It mentions he did over 7,417 push-ups in jail, and frames it not just as physical, but as a way to show them they couldn't break his spirit. He apparently kept up his workouts, his meditation, his discipline, sort of turning his cell into his dojo, as the source puts it.
Mentally, though, the document describes it as a huge struggle, a battle against solitude, the constant noise, and just uncertainty. The source claims he had nightmares, even PTSD, but crucially, it says he never once asked for help, never complained. Instead, he supposedly used the time to write, plan, strategize, and the legal side during this time, described as a Kafkaesque nightmare, just constant 30 days here, 30 days there extensions. His ability, as described, to keep that discipline up under those conditions, it does speak volumes about, the human spirit. And the source really hammers this point. Resilience isn't just a buzzword. It's presented as your lifeline when the world tries to drown you. It frames coping not just as surviving, but as thriving, turning that psychological pressure into a forge where your character is truly tested.
Right. So you have this intense personal struggle in jail.
Yeah.
How did that feed into the actual legal fight? The source calls his defense a masterclass in turning the tables. It talks about him putting together a formidable legal team, mentioning names like Tina Glandian and Eugen Vigenek.
Yeah, and a key strategic win that the document highlights was the appeal about his assets being seized. The argument was that the seizures were unlawful, basically an attempt to financially cripple him. And the source notes that in January 2024, they actually won an appeal for a retrial on that specific issue. Now, that wasn't, the whole case won, but it was presented as a significant victory, stopping that immediate financial pressure by forcing a review.
And public statements seem to have been a massive part of this whole thing, a real battlefield.
The source says Tate consistently called the case a stitch-up. And his lawyer, Eugen Vigenek, was apparently very vocal about the prosecution not sharing the complete case file. So the media strategy, as described, was all about controlling the narrative, celebrating the wins, spinning any setbacks into these stories of resilience.
It's a fascinating look at how law and public opinion interact, isn't it? The source is pretty blunt. Having a solid legal team is non-negotiable. Okay, standard enough. But then it adds public relations. That's your force multiplier.
Yeah.
It really underlines the need for, strategic thinking that goes beyond just the courtroom, recognizing that other court, the court of public opinion, is just as important.
Absolutely. And this whole thing wasn't just playing out in court. It was fierce in that court of public opinion. I mean,
Right.
when the news first broke, the document says the media just had a field day, painting him as the villain. But what's interesting is the counter-response described. Almost immediate. His supporters launched the hashtag #FreeTopG hashtag, framing the arrest not just as unjust, but as a conspiracy to silence a voice that dared to challenge the status quo. He became, for them, a symbol of resistance against what he calls the Matrix.
And his team, according to the source, fought back hard. They amplified every single legal win, however small, like when the Bucharest Court of Appeal found flaws in the case against him in November 2024. The document says they used it to question the entire prosecution's integrity.
Yeah.
But the source does also acknowledge the other side, the counter-campaigns from, groups advocating for women's rights, journalists, and even some legal experts. It wasn't one-sided.
No, definitely not. And this really brings home the point about media impact on legal stuff. It's described as undeniable. The source argues it can sway public opinion, and that in turn can influence legal processes indirectly. It even suggests that maybe the international attention and criticism might have pressured them to ensure at least the appearance of fairness, leading potentially to rulings like that November 2024 one, where the indictment had to be amended or withdrawn. It really makes you wonder, whose story wins out in the end.
Now, the source also frames these legal problems as, a harsh lesson, but an educational one, leading to some reflection on what it terms so-called mistakes. Okay. It describes him admitting that, in the rush to expand, maybe he didn't always dot every I or cross every T, particularly with his business stuff, especially online content.
Right. There's a real emphasis here on needing clarity, needing transparency. The source says he learned about being impeccable with your actions, not just legally, but in personal conduct too. Acknowledging he might have been too open, too trusting, or perhaps not cautious enough. And it references that Piers Morgan interview where he apparently admitted he should have been more hands-on with everything regarding oversight.
So the document highlights this necessity of due diligence, not just ticking legal boxes, but doing moral checks too, kind of advocating to chase integrity alongside success. It portrays him as taking responsibility for not seeing the traps they laid, for not being as sharp as he could have been, and using these supposed insights now to teach others.
Yeah, the lesson the source extracts here is pretty clear. No amount of success, no amount of fame shields you from the law or public perception. It really stresses that for public figures, you have to be smarter, more ethical, and always accountable. That's the takeaway presented.
Okay, so after the main legal fights, the source moves into a rebuilding phase, describing Andrew Tate as having rose like a phoenix. Strong imagery there. Post-release, it says he talked openly about the tough stuff, the mental toll of incarceration, the nightmares, the PTSD. But, according to the document, he turned it into content, into motivation.
Professionally, the source suggests he reassessed and adapted. It mentions expanding his platform, The Real World, to cover not just finance, but also resilience. And his behavior, as described, evolved, became more calculated. Less about just shock value, apparently, and more about the substance, focusing on wisdom, strategy, and the long game.
And his business model. The source points to significant changes, a bigger focus on transparency, more legal oversight. It mentions diversification, too, into cryptocurrency education, personal development, and even philanthropy. And his philosophy, the document claims, matured, talking more about the balance between personal freedom and responsibility and about mentorship.
This section really digs into that idea of transformation through adversity, how people are said to change. The source's lesson is stark. Resilience is the cornerstone of any comeback. And it positions legal trouble not just as a negative, but as a crucible that can either burn you down or forge you into something greater.
Right. And finally, this deep dive shows how these experiences, again, as presented in the document, supposedly reshaped his entire outlook on life, success, and the law. Freedom, for instance. It took on a new meaning for him, the source claims, not just about money, but the freedom of your mind, your spirit.
And success, too. It apparently became about resilience, about the depth of your character when the world tries to crush you, with a new emphasis on cultivating wisdom. His view of the law also reportedly shifted from being seen perhaps as just an obstacle to something you need to respect. The source suggests he started teaching that ethical conduct acts as both a shield and a sword.
So his newer teachings, detailed in the source, center around responsibility, personal, social, legal responsibility, and the importance of foresight, getting wise counsel. The document argues his philosophy grew, moving from simple confrontation to one of calculated strategy, shifting from raw ambition to refined wisdom.
Yeah, according to the source, these weren't just, bad times. They were profound life lessons, shaping this understanding that freedom is both a right and a responsibility, and that living within legal and ethical lines isn't about limiting yourself, but actually about empowering your journey. That's the perspective offered.
Wow. Well, that was quite a deep dive into the narrative laid out in Chapter 9 PDFs around Andrew Tate's legal saga. We've kind of traced the journey described from the arrest and the tough time in detention, through the legal strategies, the big public perception battle, all the way to these profound personal and philosophical shifts the source claims he underwent.
Indeed. The source really paints a picture of how legal adversity, regardless of the specific claims involved, which we're just reporting from the source, how it can be a catalyst for intense personal change, forcing, a rethink of business, of personal conduct, even core beliefs. It's definitely a stark reminder of how complex reputation is, and maybe suggests a continuous journey of self-improvement or adaptation, depending on how you see it.
So ultimately, what does all this mean for you listening? Thinking about the source's strong emphasis on fighting to control your own narrative, especially when facing public scrutiny or media attention. How do you manage your own narrative, whether it's a big challenge or just small differences in perception in your own life? It's definitely a powerful thought to mull over, isn't it?
Thank you for joining us in this episode diving into the life of Top G Andrew Tate. We hope you've gained valuable insights. Stay tuned for more episodes to come. You can grab our book on Amazon or Gumroad anytime. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, GenZ Creatives. Wishing you an ample dose of pain and suffering like NVIDIA's CEO. See you next time.